1975, Washington State. The police are called out to a residence to investigate a prowler. But when they get there, it is not a prowler. It's a Sasquatch, and they have the creature under the spotlight for several minutes. Hear all about it and more coming up next. Alright, welcome to WILLSTAR Monsters and Mysteries. What I have for you today is a treat. I have Sasquatch encounters involving the police. One of them has an encounter on a lonely road while he's on his police cruiser. He has that creature under the patrol car spotlight. A second incident where the police are called out to a residence to investigate a prowler. But when they get there, they find not a prowler, but a Sasquatch hiding out in the trees. They literally have it under their spotlight for minutes, and the police officer gives his description of the creature. I also have another report where the police are involved in finding a bunch of Sasquatch tracks. They make casts and keep the evidence. And as a bonus, I have an interview from John Green with the police officer that had the Sasquatch under his car spotlight on the road. I'm going to give you the accounts, and as always, I'm going to show you where these incidents happened using Google Earth. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. Maybe think about subscribing. Everybody, if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like button, leave me some comments. Alright, enough about that. So buckle up, strap in, let's go ahead and let's get to these. Grays Harbor, Washington, August 1969. British Columbia's best-known Sasquatch hunter is convinced the latest sighting in Washington state was a true Sasquatch. There is no doubt about it being real, said John Green, publisher and editor of the Argosy British Columbia Advance. Green returned from a one-day trip to Grays Harbor, Washington, where a deputy sheriff reported seeing a mysterious beast. Green said he does not have time to pursue the hunt, but is encouraging other Sasquatch buffs to go into the heavily wooded area. The deputy, whose identity has not been released, told Green he saw the animal in the middle of the road at 2:35 a.m. while driving home from work. He said the animal was not a bear. It had no snout, and his face had a leathery look. It was 7 to 7.5 feet tall, and weighed about 300 to 325 pounds, he said. It had hands with fingers and feet with toes. The deputy told Green he photographed one track at the edge of the road, and it measured 18.5 inches long. The animal walked upright. John Green's interview with Deputy Verlin Herrington. Grays Harbor sighting, August 7th, 1969. Deputy gives detailed description of a Sasquatch in spotlight at close range. John Green begins the interview. To begin with, could we get your name? My name is Verlin Herrington. Where do you live? I live at Copalis Beach, Washington. How old are you? 30 years old. What is your occupation? I am a deputy sheriff for Grays Harbor County. The incident we've been discussing, could you give us the date when that took place? Yes, it was July 26th. It was on a Sunday. And the year? 1969. And what time? It was 2:35 a.m. What were you doing at that time? I had been on an incident at Hump Tulips, and I was en route by way of DK Road by Grass Creek Road to the beach and into my residence. You were working at that time? Yes. What was it that happened while you were making that trip? As I was going down DK Road, I rounded a corner and my first impression was of a large bear standing in the middle of the road. I either had to stop for the bear or hit him, so I decided to stop, put on the brakes, came to a screeching halt, and coasted up the slight grade as far as I could without startling the animal as I was looking at it as I was going towards it. The animal, in my opinion, was not a bear because you could see by the way it was standing that it had no snout. It had a face on it. Its eyes reflected, and when I came to a complete stop, I could see in the headlights of my car that it had feet instead of paws, and it had breasts. When I centered my spotlight on the patrol car on it, it walked to the edge of the road. It didn't fall down on all fours like a bear would. It walked upright as a person would. It walked to the edge of the roadway and stopped, turned, still looking at me. I readjusted the spotlight of my car so I could look at it better. Its feet had hair down to the soles, but you could see the outline of the foot. It did have toes. Its hand was in a position where it was spread out, and it did have fingers. After I readjusted the spotlight, I rolled the window down, pulled my revolver, and crawled out the door. I aimed my revolver at it, and as I cocked the hammer on it, the animal went into the brush. I got back in my car and drove off. Reported the next morning back to the scene and went through the area. Found where the animal had gone into the bush and where it had come back out onto the roadway. Did you find any tracks at all? Yes, I found one indentation in the ground. I did take a photograph of it. It wasn't such a print that you could pour a cast of. How big was it? I measured the track. It was 18.5 inches. The animal itself was around 7 to 7.5 feet tall, weighing approximately 300 to 350 pounds. How far away were you when you were looking at it? 75 to 80 feet. How long would you say you were able to observe it before it left the road? Approximately a minute or a minute and a quarter, maybe a minute and a half. This was from the time that I came to a complete stop. I was observing it as I coasted towards it, so maybe overall 2 minutes. And in all that time it was standing erect on its hind legs? Yes, it was. And as it went off into the brush, it was still on its hind legs. Where it went into the brush, that's down quite a steep little bank, isn't it? Yes, it is. And could you see that it remained erect as it went down the bank? Yes, until it went out of the spotlight. Had it started to descend the bank in the spotlight, or was it gone from the spotlight? It went down the bank, and approximately halfway down it went out of the spotlight, still in an erect position. Just to sort of go over it from top to bottom, can you tell us anything about the shape of the head? For instance, your first impressions. Did it have a snout? No, it didn't have a snout. I couldn't say that it had a nose like a person would have. I believe that there was no hair on its face. It had a dark, leathery look. Did you get any impression of the length of the hair on the head or on the rest of it? I would say about 3 to 4 inches on the head. It didn't have long hanging hair at all? Longer on the head than on the body, yes. What sort of neck did it have? No neck. You mentioned, I think, that it had breast? Yes. Where on the body were they located? Like a human person's. They were also covered with hair except for the nipples, and they were skin. Did you mention the color of the hair? No, I didn't. It was brownish black, dark colored. You say you saw a hand with fingers extended? Yes. Could you tell how long the arms were? I would have to guess at how long they were. The arm that I was looking at was in a bent position, like you catch someone startled. You couldn't at any time see how far down the body the arm would come? No. Comparing it to a human, would you say that it had long legs or short legs? Long legs, I would say. Very long, muscular legs. Did it take long strides? No, it seemed like it took small steps as it walked. It was watching me as it walked to the edge of the road. They would have been large steps for a normal human, but for this animal they were short steps. About 3 steps from the center of the road to the edge. Did you notice any difference in the way it walked and the way a human would walk? No, same type of position and same type of walk as a human being. Any other details that you can recall that you noticed about it? Not really, that pretty well covers it. You didn't see the teeth, I guess? No. Did it taper at the waist? Did it have a narrow waist? It was a big body, a big stout body. That's the best I remember it was. It could have been thinner at the waist, I don't remember. But it was pretty heavily built? Yes, it was. Yes, it was. In the fall of 1975, a police officer answering a prowler call told of encountering a Sasquatch. The officer was a sergeant on the Lummi Indian Reservation in Washington State. Throughout the early part of October, he, along with other officers, had answered several calls concerning some creature that made loud noises in the vicinity of houses, and there had been 4 reports of hairy bipeds being seen. On one occasion, the captain of the police force had shot with his revolver at an animal he saw in the bush beside a field that appeared to be about 6 feet tall and hair-covered. The descriptions given indicated that more than one creature was being seen, although not more than one at a time. Then again, on October 23rd, around 7:30 p.m., the same sergeant was called to a house where something had been heard pounding on the back wall. The woman who lived there had gone next door to her son's home, and there was no prowler in sight. But something had apparently torn a plastic cover off the back doorway, and there was a broken window. At 2:20 a.m. the same night, something was again reported behind the house, And when the sergeant arrived, along with several other people, their spotlight quickly picked up what looked like a very large ape standing in the backyard. While someone else held the light on it, the sergeant walked up to within 35 feet of the animal, which crouched down but made no attempt to run. There they stayed for, quote-unquote, many minutes while the sergeant wondered what to do next. He had a shotgun loaded with buckshot, but he was not sure if the thing was some kind of a human, and if it wasn't, he was not sure how much buckshot it could take. He noted afterwards in his report that it was black in color, would stand about 7 to 8 feet tall, and appeared to have no neck. It was covered with short hair except on the face. He could see no ears. The eyes were small. It appeared to have 4 teeth larger than the others, 2 upper and 2 lower. Its nose was flat. He could see the nostrils. By that time there were 7 people there, all of whom could see the thing, although only 2 others had approached close to it. Then there were noises heard off in the dark on both sides, and the man with the spotlight swung it off to the right and called that there was another one over there. At that point, the sergeant decided to return to his patrol car. Lummi Indian Reserve, Washington. More than 100 reports of a Sasquatch-like being have swept this reservation 7 miles west of Bellingham, and witnesses include all 3 members of the local police force. Sergeant Cooper of the reservation's police force said in a telephone interview Tuesday from his home that the tiny federal government-operated police force has been swamped with reports since late September. Sergeant Cooper said he has seen or heard the Sasquatch, which he described as an ape-like being standing 7.5 feet high, 3 times since October 10th. Most of the sightings have been confined to an area of 4 square miles on the reserve, he said. The Sasquatch has been blamed for the deaths of 3 dogs and a neck wound on a horse that required 16 stitches, he said. There are no people on the road at night now, he said. Most people did not believe the first reports. He said when they saw the Sasquatch's footprints or heard it, they changed their minds. Sergeant Cooper said so many people were chasing the Sasquatch with guns that the Lummi Tribal Council voted to outlaw shooting the creature. We get reports every other day, he said. In fact, I just received one minutes ago. The first time he saw the Sasquatch on October 10th, it ran off into the bushes, Sergeant Cooper said. But on October 24th at 2:20 a.m., he was able to observe the Sasquatch for a long time, from a range of 35 feet. After answering a complaint about the Sasquatch, he came around the back of the house where a window had been ripped out. There was a being there about 7.5 feet tall. It was like nothing I've ever seen before, he said. He said the being was covered with black hair and was very muscular. After the sighting, he checked an encyclopedia and found that the legendary Sasquatch resembled an orangutan, except in size and color. It was steaming as if it had been running. It had upturned nostrils and had almost no neck, he said. He added that the being looked very different from his relatives' descriptions of the Sasquatch. But Sasquatch hunter John Green said in an interview Tuesday from Agassiz that Sergeant Cooper has definitely seen a Sasquatch. He said Indians believe Sasquatches to be more human-like than they actually are. Sergeant Cooper is a Lummi Indian. When asked if he was scared of the Sasquatch, Sergeant Cooper said no, I had a sawed-off shotgun with me. He had been anxious to see the beast when the sightings first came in. He said, but now I hope I never see it again. When the Sasquatch was sighted, it hunched down in the bushes but did not run away, Sergeant Cooper said. It looked like it was studying us. He said several people examined the Sasquatch with 2 spotlights for a long time. Then we just backed off and left. He said he was unable to photograph the Sasquatch because the police department's camera is out of order. But on November 1st, he obtained a 20-second recording of the Sasquatch's yell with a dictaphone. He recorded the yell, which he said was very powerful and high-pitched, while the Sasquatch followed alongside his car. The car was moving at 10 miles per hour, he said. He called his brother Lee, also a police officer, on the radio while the Sasquatch was yelling. That sound was heard all over Whatcom County, Cooper said. Lee Cooper said in a telephone interview Tuesday he used the recording 2 days later to attract the Sasquatch to a garbage dump where it had earlier been sighted. Lee Cooper said he could not see what the Sasquatch looked like except that it was 6 feet tall and his eyes shone in the spotlight. He added that it kind of walked like an ape. Alright, coming up next, I have a newspaper article about Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Deputy Dennis Heryford. Now, the sheriff's deputy has spent years collecting evidence of the Sasquatch, and the newspaper article goes all into that. And then following the newspaper article, I have the report that he wrote up about the evidence that he collected. Let's get to it. Wednesday, June 13th, 1984. Grays Harbor Chronicle. Is Sasquatch for real? Well, just maybe, according to evidence. Sheriff's Deputy Dennis Heryford is hot on the tracks of a Sasquatch. He's accumulated 5 molds of 15-inch footprints reportedly left by the creature in its Gray Harbor County stomping grounds. The tracks of the controversial creature were reported to the Grays Harbor County Sheriff's Department 2 years ago, and the molds made are some of the clearest ever produced, he said. The footprints, 2 inches deep and 6 inches wide, have 5 telltale characteristics Sasquatch trackers look for, including overhanging toenails, visible tendons, and bunions, he said. In addition, some have ridges similar to those found on human prints. We discount some of the stuff we come across, but these are the ones that you just can't discount. As part of his job, Heryford investigates reports of Sasquatch sightings and track findings. No footprints that could be verified had been found since the 4 that were reported in April and May 1982, although Heryford has investigated 5 reports this year. We sit on the edge this time of year. March through May is the time that either people go out and make tracks or whatever is making the tracks is on the move, he said. One trail of footprints found in 1982 was discovered just north of the campgrounds on Porter Creek Road by a pastor on an outing with a group of children. Another trail was found near Sat Sop River, just east of the Sat Sop River Bridge by a picnicking family. Tracks found in April 1982 were discovered south of Elma near Abbott Hill by 2 loggers. A week later, a trail was found near Oakville by a passerby, Heryford said. He sent a hair sample found at the Abbott Hill site to a physical anthropologist in Arizona. In order to test the lab's credibility, he also sent a human sample and asked the anthropologist to identify both samples. He correctly identified the human hair and said the other hair had a non-human roots and did not resemble known human or primate hairs on file. Heryford had his first taste of Sasquatch sighting in 1977, when an 8-year-old boy returning from school reported seeing an 8-foot-tall creature jump from a tree near South Union Road just east of Elma. The boy, who was very upset, told Heryford later that the large brown-furred creature had a furry face and long hairy arms, which swung while it walked. It appeared it was more shy than anything. The kid took off running and looked back and saw it running in the opposite direction, Heryford said. He collected hair samples and a plaster of Paris footprint mold at the scene. But the evidence was later lost, he said, adding that he also found roots chewed off ferns and saliva on fern shoots. He said his interest in Sasquatch snowballed after that incident. Some of the critics say the kid made the tracks, but there's no way he made them. While surveying the scene, Heryford said his excellently trained Doberman Pinscher refused to follow him along the footprint trail. Sasquatch, which typically stands 8 to 10 feet tall and weighs 400 to 850 pounds, with a shoulder span of 4 feet, was sighted in 1969 near Hoquiam by Verlin Herrington, a sheriff's deputy at the time, Hereford said. Herrington reported seeing the creature 75 feet away on DK Road off Ocean Beach Road north of Hoquiam. We have more evidence that it does exist than the people who say it doesn't. But most people are afraid to go out on a limb and say it does exist, Heryford said, adding that the most undisputed evidence was presented by Roger Patterson, who reportedly filmed the creature in Bluff Creek in Northern California. Heryford said he's run into his share of skeptics, but accepts the ribbing with a sense of humor. Up until you bring in absolute positive evidence, there's always going to be criticism. But then some people still don't believe we landed on the moon either, he said. People are often reluctant to report findings for fear of ridicule, he added. It's gotten to the point where people are afraid to say something, or when they do, they get a finger pointed at them and then they don't say anything again. One reason Sasquatch trackers don't get the credibility Heryford thinks they deserve is because some trackers lack believability. There are a lot of eccentrics in this business, he said, citing an instance in which one Bigfoot aficionado put forward a theory that the creatures were 1,200-pound robots that arrived from outer space with a home port in the North Pole. The guy is a nut, and he tarnishes the credibility that we're trying to build, Heryford said. In addition, some people sculpt phony footprints to fool trackers, he said, but bonus tracks usually are easily identified. If there are people making tracks, then they're making them in Washington, California, Oregon, Idaho, China, Tibet, on and on and on. Some trackers have dropped the ball by identifying bear prints as Sasquatch tracks. Adding the bears often place their tracks on top of each other, making a large print similar to a Sasquatch track. Lionel Brown, an archaeologist at Grays Harbor College, agrees that bear prints are often mistakenly identified as Sasquatch tracks. I find a lot of similarity between Sasquatch and bears. A lot of what people are seeing are bears walking around on their hind legs, and they're very curious animals, and the hand and footprints are remarkably human, Mr. Brown said. While he follows academic research on the creature, Brown said he is skeptical of its existence. I have an open mind on all things, but I have yet to see anything of substance that would lead me to believe such a critter exists, he said. Noting that Sasquatch reports are a yearly phenomenon, Brown said he received 3 reports of footprints findings this spring. Of the 2 he investigated, one was washed out and the other was questionable, he said. He added that he's wary of acknowledging the validity of prints, since people have admitted making phony tracks. Though universal legends of half-man, half-animal creatures lend credence to reports of sightings, Brown said, enigmatic footprints are not enough to prove they exist. I am not one of the Sasquatch believers, but if I saw some concrete physical evidence, I would say it would warrant some investigation, Brown said. He noted that no bones had been found that could be identified as Sasquatch remains, but Heryford said that people often assume bones discovered in the woods are animal remains. Besides, Heryford said, how often do people go out and look specifically for Sasquatch bones? As a child growing up in Washington, Heryford said he wanted to believe in Sasquatch, but did not have evidence to support its existence. Heryford says, now we have evidence to support it, but we still don't have a body, and until we do, there will always be skeptics. Grays Harbor County, Washington, 1982. On numerous dates listed within the report, the witnesses, Grays Harbor officers Dennis Heryford, deputy, Michael Boehm, deputy, Verrill Hutchinson, sergeant, Ronald Whiteman, sergeant, and Patrolman James Young from the Oakville Police Department, and I had an occasion to examine unusual scenes which to date have been undetermined as to the origin of the evidence found. On April 22, 1982, at approximately 16:09 hours, I was contacted at my residence by a private citizen in reference to a number of large tracks found in a fairly secluded area of the eastern portion of Grays Harbor County. The location is known as Abbott Hill to the local residents and is rarely traveled or visited. It consists of a 2-year-old clear-cut of privately owned timberlands surrounded by second-growth timber and a heavily vegetated forest floor. There is presently one road around the clear-cut and one dividing the clear-cut with short spurs off of each. I was escorted to one of these spurs and was shown 2 large what appeared to be footprints with human features in an area along the base of the fire trail. The tracks were obviously made after the rains and before the sun had dried the mud, as there were virtually no rainpocks in the major portion of the track. They were approximately 46 inches apart, and the toes of each track pointed the same direction. No other tracks were visible in the muddy area or along the grassy edge. A distinct trail could be found leading from the top of the small hill downhill through 8-foot-high salmonberries, devil's club, blackberries, and other intertwined plants. The plants were either broken over entirely or the tops were broken. The trail measured 36 inches across and was approximately 150 feet long. It ended on the roadway at the point where the aforementioned tracks were observed. I photographed both tracks and made a plaster cast of the left foot. The tracks measured 15.5 inches long by 6 3/4 inches wide at the longest and widest points. At the deepest point into the mud, the track measured 1.5 inches deep. This plaster cast was retrieved as evidenced by me. A hair was removed from between the second and third toes of the left track and sent to the Institute of Cryptozoology in Tucson, Arizona for analyzation. No results have been obtained at the time of this writing. More tracks were observed, photographed, measured, and processed at the end of the spur, approximately a quarter of a mile from the first set of tracks. The longest step at this location measured 9 feet between steps, and only the ball of the foot was distinguishable at the end of each 9-foot step. From there, a trail of broken vegetation and matted grass went down the hillside into rugged clearcut and a drainage. The perimeter road was searched for further sign, but to no avail. At the same time, I was informed of more tracks located 7 miles west of our present location along the Satsop River at a place called Woman's Bar. Upon investigation, I found 2 separate sets of tracks together, both starting from under the water, traveling westerly and ending in hard-packed gravel, which made tracking difficult at best. These tracks were photographed and measured by me. The longest was 17 inches long by 7.5 inches wide. The smallest was 15.5 inches long and 6 inches wide. Both sets were made in hard-packed river sand and appear to have been the result of a great weight being placed on each foot. The steps measured from 39 inches to 52 inches. No casts were made of these due to the lack of plaster of Paris at the time. Upon return to the scene with the proper casting materials, I found only portions of the tracks, due to human tracks made by curiosity seekers. On April 27, 1982, I was informed by Officer Jim Young of the Oakville Police Department of numerous tracks discovered along the Chehalis River in an area known as Elma Gate Boat Launch. According to Jim, these tracks were followed approximately a half a mile upstream. Sergeant Verrill Hutchinson and I went to the area where I photographed, measured, and processed the scene. Hutchinson retained the cast of the left foot. The measurement was 15 inches long by 6.25 inches wide. Further investigation revealed a trail of approximately 1 mile, steps measuring from 34 to 59 inches. On May 23, 1982, I was contacted at my residence by a pastor of a local church and requested to the Porter Creek area for investigation of large tracks sighted in a fairly secluded area of Capitol Forest. I contacted Officer Mike Beam and we met the pastor and were escorted to the scene. There were 4 tracks around in the area. Numerous photos were taken of the tracks, and 2 casts were made of 2 tracks. Officer Beam retaining one, I the other. An aspen tree was scratched in such a way indicating 5 fingers or like items were used to make marks. The lowest mark was located 72 inches from the ground, and the highest was located 98 inches from the ground. This portion of the tree was removed and is held as evidence. Numerous branches were broken from approximately 8 to 11 feet high in the trees. A wad of approximately 12 ferns, minus the roots, were found at the creek along with 2 new growth portions of aspen branches. A subsequent search of the opposite bank of the creek revealed numerous tracks traveling downstream. The area the tracks were located is a sharp bank covered with ground salal and devil's club. The tracks were followed approximately 1.5 miles and were lost at the edge of a clear cut. Of the sightings investigated, no 2 tracks were of the same measurements. The largest distance between the sightings was between the Elma Gate and Abbott Hill, approximately 9 miles. All the sightings indicated something of great weight, 600 or more pounds, with steps varying between 32 and 59 inches, not including the 2 tracks of 9 feet between each step. At the Porter Creek and Elma Gate scenes, there was evidence of obvious foraging. At all the scenes, there was evidence of great height and weights, and more importantly, a lack of human tracks to indicate the evidence was placed there as a hoax.